So we have 10 attendees right now.
Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar on how to prepare CV. We're going to start in about 3 minutes. We're going to start in about 3 minutes from now because we're waiting for more attendees to come. Thank you for your patience. Hello everyone. So thank you for coming for joining our today's webinar on how to prepare CV with ID. And before that, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Nabiha Ramli and I'm from NAMSA. And also currently I'm studying I'm a junior at University of California, San Diego. We with major in human biology and also a minor in chemistry. As you all know, for today's webinar on how to prepare a CV, we have a very great speaker, which is Kadi, and I will introduce a little bit more about her um, in a few seconds. All right. So, Miss Diana, or affectionately known as Kadi, among Malaysian students in France, have been a recruitment specialist since 2003, spending her first 8 years in headhunting, where she covered middle and senior level management hires. She later specialized in campus and graduate recruitment, where she coached and trained many undergraduates and graduates from Malaysia and foreign universities. Kadi finished her Bachelor of Business degree course at Monash University in Australia in 1999. She continues to deliver coaching and training programs both virtually and on-site through company that she founded in Singapore before migrating to France in the spring of 2015. So I would like to welcome Kadis, our speaker for today, to start the presentation. But before that, I would like to give a reminder. If you have any question along the way, along the presentation, please kindly drop the question on the Q&A box at the bottom of the webinar. And I will address them at the end of the session. Thank you so much. Welcome, Kadi.
Thank you, Naviha. Thank you for having me speak out there. It's an honor to share what I know here with the US students here from Malaysia. So good morning or good afternoon to you. It's or good evening, whichever part of the world everyone else is from. Thank you for the introduction. So you can call me Kadi because from what you've gathered, I finished my degree in 1999. Okay, so with that, with my years of recruitment, I hope that I can share some knowledge and experience with you. And as in any other webinars or sharings that I participate in, I always hope that we can start with an open mind. This way we can digest a bit more of what is being shared with us. Okay, so first of all, before I begin, I just want to reiterate what Nabiha said. So I will go through the presentation for about 45 minutes. And then at the end of it, we can open it to the floor for any questions that Nabiha would then read out to us. Okay? Right then. So first of all, how to prepare a CV, which is a great topic here. What is a CV? Okay. What is a CV, right? A CV, according to the definition given by Indeed.com, a CV is a detailed document highlighting your professional and academic history. I think this is what we normally have on most of our CVs, right? And it gets a bit extended there as what is defined. CVs typically include information like work experience, achievements, and awards. And then some people also include scholarships, grants, what have you, on their CV. So research projects, publications, basically a summary of your work and experiences. Okay, right, next. What does a CV do? We know what a CV is now. It is a piece of document. What does it do? A CV is used during the initial application stage for a job, right? So we have that piece of document and we send it across for jobs that we may have interest in to apply for them in order to land one. And more often than not, this CV is accompanied by a cover letter or even a job application form that you fill mainly online these days, okay? And when the employer picks it up, they determine as to whether this person, namely you, who has submitted that CV based on that piece of document is of fit to the company or of that job requirement that they need, right? And from there, from that assessment, they then invite you to an interview. And these days, interviews can be done on the phone, face to face, or even over video like Skype, especially if you're over long distances, right? Now, just like a relationship, you have been dating for a while, this person, a boy and a girl, or you've been getting to know each other for a while, and eventually, you know, you like each other, you love each other, and you seal the deal in marriage, right? So the same thing with a job application. After everyone is agreeable, the employer likes you, you like them back, and the job is then offered to you. Okay, next slide. Let's look at the job process in a gist. Okay, so you begin the job process with the job search. You might see a job advertisement online, or you might hear of it. Somebody recommends you a job that could be of interest to you. And what do? You write in, you submit your piece of document that was mentioned earlier, that was defined earlier, known as a CV, and perhaps even your cover letter in the next second box. And then the employer picks it up and calls you in for an interview. Okay, and as illustrated earlier, you get the job offer when everybody is happy with everybody. Okay, next slide. Where does the CV go? Okay, so you know what it is, you know what it does. So where does it go this time, right? In a gist, the CV goes to companies. Okay, companies that you actually apply the jobs to. Okay, but what kind of companies? Who in the companies actually pick them up? Um, this is just an image of a hierarchy within a company. Okay, for instance, you're looking for a job as an accountant. So the person that you will be reporting to if you get the job is the finance manager of that company. And so he or she sits within the company, and she or he has a boss who is probably the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, depending on how big or small or the structure of the company is. Okay, so all these people may get a hold of your CV to ascertain whether or not you are of a good fit, not just by looking at your CV, but by the interviews that you will be having with them. So before the interviews, they'll be looking at your CV. Normally, in medium to even big size companies, well, depending on the structure, because there are small companies that also designate a recruiter who sits within the human resource department. And this recruiter is in charge of taking in all the CVs and then sharing it with the respective divisions. Okay, so these are just some examples of where the CV goes to, and eventually these are the people that you need to impress for your interview and in order for you to get the job. Next slide. Where else does it go to? Now, again, the CV goes to different companies that you might be sending it to, or if you're sending your CV online somewhere, it can be generated and probably be distributed to different people or different companies. And some of these names that you see here could be familiar to you, known as job agencies. They are also recruiters, as a recruiter that I have actually shared on with you earlier, except that is a recruiter sitting within the company known as an internal recruiter. This is external recruiter. Okay, so they do the same thing. They filter CVs and they speak to you. They know what other job requirements needed for their clients, who are the companies that you are going to work in. Okay, so these are who you will be sending your CV to, or where the CV will go to. All right. Following that, the next slide gives you an overview of the beginning of that job search. Okay, I put right at the top there how the process goes, beginning with your job search as mentioned earlier, and then submitting your CV, followed by interview and the job offer. Right now we are at the job search and the CV, where you begin your job search and then you send your CV. Okay, next slide. So after sending in your CV, the recruiter, as I mentioned earlier, this is just an example because in some companies, if you're looking for an accountant position, there are some cases where your prospective boss, who is in this case the finance manager, might be the one who handles all the coming in of the CVs. But their job is mainly not to look through CVs. Their job is to do financial work, right? So at that point that they are actually going through the CV, they act as a recruiter. So let's call them a recruiter, which, as I mentioned, usually would be designated within the HR department of the company. Okay, so when you send in that CV to that company, you will the recruiter receives a gazillion CV applications, right? Job applications. For the advertisement that they posted on an accountant in that company, and let's give a number. Say they receive 100 CVs, and out of that, statistically, most of the time, 80% goes to trash. Okay, so it is the job of the recruiter to filter this gazillion CVs and pick out the right ones and bring the number down to maybe a 20%. So obviously they have 20 pieces of CV, as you can see in the next slide. So part of the hiring process is that after the recruiter has filtered all these 20 CVs, they further screen all the 20 and see who are they going to call based on further requirements of the job description of the company and so on. And perhaps they end up with 15 to call. So they call 15 and realize that maybe 7 would be the closest fit. They want to meet up with the 7 in order to ascertain, in person how good you are and how much of a match you are. Okay, the next slide would show you that out of that 7 that this recruiter brings in for interview, there will be further filtering or shortlisting of candidates, and they bring it down from 7 to 3, in which these 3 would go for the second or third interview with different department heads or managers and so on. Okay, in the next slide, out of the 3, it shows you that that one person from the 100 CVs gets hired. Okay, so you can see that throughout the hiring process, you need to be able to make it into that 20% earlier mentioned, not to be thrown into the trash, right? So how do you make it into that 20%? You need to be attractive enough to remain, to be picked out, okay? So going on to the next slide, I would like to draw to your attention an analogy which I normally tend to draw more of on a daily basis, because hopefully with this we get to relate more easily to. Okay, now for example, this is a profile of someone on a social network. Okay, because I'm based in France, so I picked one out here. Someone who actually puts a profile on meetic.com. It is a social networking site most of the time with the intention of getting to know someone, okay, of the opposite sex, to form a relationship, and probably with the objective of getting married. Now, this is pretty common anywhere in the world as well. So this lady, she puts a lovely photo of herself and tells us a bit of a story about her. What is she like? How tall she is? What languages she speaks, and so on. What are her hobbies? What does she do professionally, and so on. Okay, so if I were a guy and I look at her photo and I think she's quite pretty and I like her profile, what do I want to do? I don't necessarily want to get married to her right away. I want to get to know her better, right? So what do I do when I want to get to know her better? Just like when the CV is being picked up by the employer, they want to get to know you better first. They don't give you the job offer, all right? Because often the CV is, after all, a piece of document. You are going to get married to the person. In this case, if you see a profile of a lovely person, you're going to get married to her and not her profile, okay? But the profile, in this case a CV, still needs to be attractive enough in order for it to be picked up as part of that process of getting to know that person and eventually land a deal, okay, at the end of the journey. All right, so the next slide, I mean, after you have contacted that girl, go out on a date or meet up with her, and that's how you get to know her. You like her, you meet her even more. So the same thing for companies, right? They like you and they will meet you. Maybe they will share a bit more about you in person, get you into for more than one interview to meet up with everybody else involved in the hiring process. So you can see that while the CV is a part of that process, it is also instrumental to have a CV that is attractive enough to go on that first date, which in this case, to be called up for that interview. Okay? All right, moving on to the next slide. The CV itself, and this is where it gets interesting because this is about what the webinar is about, right? The CV, what's involved in it. So I've broken it down to very quick points here, which is really you creating a CV and then customizing a CV and then finally applying for that job, which is sending the CV. So here's an example of a CV. All right. Next slide would also still capture the same process I mentioned at the top, highlighting in green, create where we are at right now. And as we move along into the process of the CV, we will see what needs to be done and where we are at in that process. Okay, so we will stick to everything there is to know about the CV process right now. And we begin with creating one. So creating the CV, what is involved? Two things really, contents and the format. Okay, contents, it's really as straightforward as what should go into your CV. And we will discuss that in shortly, what goes into your CV and what should not go into your CV. As for format, there are different styles, and you will find what is the one that suits you best, that could possibly suit the prospective employer as well. Okay. Next slide. Still at the beginning stage of creating the CV. What should be in your CV? Your name, of course, right? Now, this is a no-brainer. I personally have not come across, maybe if I did, it can't be more than 2 or 3 in my lifetime, someone who has never stated their name on their CV. The reason why I say that is because in that person's mind, they're sending it through email for a job application. All their details are somewhere in the cover letter, in the job application, which is online, and they think that the CV is all that there is left, and to the point that they might even leave out their name. Okay, so make sure that you're careful about that. Everything should be in that one piece of document for you to be contacted on. Okay, right. So what should be in your CV? The name. What is in a name? Right, now here you see an image of a few celebrities, right? Paula Abdul, Jackie Chan, Katy Perry, Johnny Depp, and Will Smith, to name a few. So what is it about them that I'm trying to bring to your attention is on their name. The names are catchy. They are a celebrity. Their names need to be catchy, something that everybody can remember them by, right? And you are a celebrity in your own right, especially when you're beginning your career. You know, that's you are actually branding yourself. You are beginning to brand yourself, and your name goes along with it. Now, in many cultures, even those cultures that we may be familiar with, there may be the longest names ever. Okay, when you're on an international arena, not everybody knows which is your first, your third, and your last name. Okay, and Will Smith goes by Will Smith and not whatever his name was given at birth. I'm just guessing, like whether it's William Robert Peter Roger Smith. He is just Will Smith, and everybody knows him as that. So it is really recommended for you, as someone who brands yourself, to walk on that red carpet, which is your CV is your red carpet. to have a name that is catchy as well. Not to mean that you have to change your name, staying true to your real name, of course. So it is really recommended, especially if whether you're applying for a job in the US or even back in Malaysia, to have your name as the first and your last. And if you want to keep a middle name or something, keep it at 3, the max. Of course, most people would do the first and last, and that's it. Why I say this, even throughout the times that I have done training and coaching, while it has been very much understood, I still see a lot of the longest names ever on their LinkedIn profiles. Okay, so remember Will Smith? He doesn't have all his long names there. You only put every single bit of your name on administration forms. Okay, when you are registering for your marriage, when you enter a hospital, like you need to have an operation, stuff like that. You go through immigration office and stuff that you need to apply for a passport, things like that, right? But your CV is the red carpet, like much like the celebrities that I mentioned. Okay, all right. So the next slide would still remaining on creating your CV to include your contact. Again, this should be a no-brainer, but luckily we haven't seen too many people without contacts, their contact details, I mean. Although I have seen them, again, put everything there is all in one piece of document. Make it easy, make it practical for the recruiter to call you up, the employer to call you up with that piece of paper, with that one piece of document, okay? And not having to find your name on the email and contact details somewhere else, and your experience in the LinkedIn profile. That's not their job. Their job is just, put yourself in the situation, as I mentioned, I've illustrated earlier. You've got 100 CVs. In that short time, you need to make it through to their books, really, to be picked up. Everything should be in that one piece of document. And it is important to be easily contactable. Even though most people have their phone numbers, sometimes they might leave out things like country code and area code. Given that the US is so huge, now that you are based in the US in itself, you could be stationed in California, but the job that you had applied for or the company that is calling you up from is in New York, okay? They're not going to know where in the 50 states you are based at. They can make sure everything is accessible for them, because not being able to reach this person is like trying to get hold of a missing person. Okay, they're not going to go all that way to reach out to you when they have so many other CVs to look at. So you don't want to lessen your chance of not being called up for that first interview, right? So what more if you are maybe based in the US and you are looking for a job back in Malaysia upon graduation, when you want to return back to Malaysia, it is important to give a very clear contact details, okay? And not, when I say phone number, often people put their dialing code, and you don't need that 001, what have you. It's all very confusing. 001, it applies in different countries, okay? In other countries, they don't use 001. They use whatever they're subscribed, their network it gives them to dial up, okay? So what's important is your country code, which is +1, and whatever your area code is, 475, what have you, followed by a number. This is so simple, and yet there are a lot of people who make this mistake, and it lessens the chance of them of being contactable, right? And followed by email address, of course, which aids and facilitates other documentations to follow, or further information that can be provided between the two parties, the employer and yourself, the candidate. And if you have a LinkedIn address, you can add that as well into your contact details. All right, so moving on to the next slide, still within what should be in your CV is the part of education. I've stated an example here of how you can write your education onto your CV. This is quite unique to the US as well, Santa Clara University, what the person majored in, what year, and whatnot. Okay. Basically this section, which is the education section, it can be at the beginning of a CV, or you can choose to list it after other sections. Okay, the order is up to you. In the beginning, there is no hard or fast rule about how a CV should be. Okay, it's just a matter of getting most of the main structure right. Okay, with all that I've shared here, what should go into your CV, and styles may differ. Okay, so whether or not the education is at the beginning or at the end, it is not that great of an importance as what the contents are. Okay, so the order is up to you. List your education in reverse chronicle order. Okay, so if you just look at the following slide, you can see that an example of someone who has several certifications or degrees, right? So he or she started out doing Associate of Arts and Sciences in this institution in Bergen Community College, starting out in 2012, ending in 2016. And then afterwards, he or she went on to do the Bachelor of Science in Accounting from 2016 to 2018 before taking his or her Master of Business Administration in Accounting. Again, the years here would go in a chronicle order backwards. Okay, so because the latest was that he or she took his master's in the year 2018, which is projected to finish in 2020. So that goes right at the top, followed by what was just before, and going backwards to the beginning of his or her education, right? So list the name of your university, which is shared here, the dates you went there. Okay, it's just keep it at years is good enough. Your major and minor, as well as your grade point average or A levels. Why I say this, because I believe in many US universities, a lot of emphasis is being put on GPA. So it is definitely handy for you, a way to score there when you actually share your GPA as well. And A levels, obviously, if someone who comes from more of a British-based university or education, A levels would be before anything else, right? Okay, so next slide will tell you more of what should be in your CV, which is the skills. I've stated here the language and computer skills are just some of the examples, some common examples of what should be in your CV. So you can create a section for your skills and achievements even. Achievements may not be stated here, but again, this is just an example of what could value add to you for you to score in to match it against what the job requirements are. So this part is where you list the things you accomplished at your previous jobs and even the skills you have developed through the experiences, because skills may not necessarily just be these two that are stated in the slide, but also the skills that you have developed from acquiring or achieving certain projects or certain hurdles during your course of work or education. Okay. That said, on the topic of computer skills, skills often include computer skills such as Excel, right? So as stated here, Microsoft Office is definitely almost the basic computer skill that everyone needs these days. And I've just thrown some examples there. If you're in HR, you might be using Taleo and in some cases SAP and so on. So this would be handy to state on your CV as part of the skills. Language, whatever language that you speak, especially if these languages or one language at least would be relevant to your the job that you are applying for. Okay, so if you were, say, well, stating these languages and computer skills on your CV would be pretty much how I would say stating the targeted skills, okay, targeted skills that the companies may be seeking out for. So, example, if you are you're applying for a coding job, which is in IT, right? And you mentioned there that you have worked with JavaScript. So this would go under your computer skills. So this is handy. Okay. Right. Next slide. We get onto the work experience as part of creating your CV. So this chunk here, as you can see, illustrates just I would say pretty much typical of a fresh graduate CV, where you might have interned somewhere, or not necessarily a fresh graduate, someone who's just had one job in his life after graduation. So it gives you an idea of how to state one internship and a job next to each other, or one after another. Of course, if you're fresh graduate, you're most likely to have just the internship experience there. Okay, so with that, list all the relevant work experiences by the company name, location, month, and year you worked there for and what you did. Okay, so start with the most recent job and work experience. So this is pretty much like what I've shared earlier on the education part in chronicle order and work backwards, right? So only put jobs that are relevant. Okay. So if you haven't got more than one job experience, you may include part-time or seasonal jobs, but make sure, okay, that they are relevant. Let me give you an example. If you are applying as an assistant engineer at Ford Motors, just as an example, okay, you may want to include your part-time job experience as a mechanic in Chevrolet. Okay, but if you have worked part-time as a mechanic and you are applying as an accountant, then there is no need to include this part-time experience as a mechanic for your accountant job application. Right, hope that's clear. Okay, moving on to the next slide. We've shared on what should go into your CV. Those are just the important essentials. Okay, here are some that you may include. That means it's not a problem if you don't include them, and if you include them, it's not a problem either. Okay, either way, it's okay. But if you include them, it's only to be of value to you, to the company that you're applying the job at. Okay, as I mentioned, if you have worked part-time or seasonal somewhere, and this could be of benefit to you, as the job may be relevant, your skills or experience may be relevant, then you may state that. The same goes with hobbies and interests. Most of the time, especially if you are an experienced professional, there is no need to put hobbies and interests. But especially if you are not an experienced professional as yet, because you've just come out of school, you may not have that much of experience apart from your internship, or the most one other experience, then you may include hobbies and interests that could be reflective of you in terms of your character and perhaps even your experience, in order for you to show the relevance to the job that you apply for. Okay, but I must warn you that when you brainstorm your hobbies and interests, while it is you know, to state the unique interest or hobbies of yourself. This will make you stand out. Okay, be aware that the conclusions that might be drawn from your hobbies. Okay, list hobbies that portray you as a team-oriented individual, rather than a solitary or passive person. Okay, so companies want someone who works well with others and can take charge. Okay, positive image and of a hobby, for instance, like being a captain of your soccer or football team, or even organizing a charity event for an orphanage could be very well received. Okay, whereas if you state that you enjoy playing solitaire on your computer, my question to you is, how does that add value to the job? Okay, example, if you apply for a job as an event manager, where a lot of moving around is involved, meeting people, and so on, it is going to be contradictory to you stating that you enjoy playing solitaire on your computer. Okay, so and just to give you quickly an example, if you were to state anything on hobbies or interest, how that's going to benefit you, and your kind and your the job that you apply for. If you apply for a journalist job, for instance, it's great to share that you enjoy reading uh, great American writers such as Twain and Hemingway, because of the unique perspectives into American culture that they write from. Okay, so these are just some things to take note of. And of course, right at the bottom there, you can see the other experiences that you may include. Okay, so all this depends on how it's going to add value to you for the job. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we have shared on what to say, what to have on your CV. What about what not to share on your CV? Now, I know this might be something that we could easily laugh at, weight and height, right? Not to include that, but believe me, in this is quite commonly shared on CVs, especially those of certain cultures. But most of us tend to not apply for jobs in certain countries. I'm just drawing out in most of the countries that we may be applying jobs in, weight and height wouldn't be required, unless, I don't know, unless maybe you are applying for a job as a gym coach, perhaps, to show how your fitness and so on. Right, again, it all depends on what kind of job you're after. But in general, if you're talking about professional jobs, please leave all these things out. It is not important to share your relationship status as well. When they get there, when you cross the bridge, and they will ask you about it, because maybe the job requires travel and so on. But for as long as there isn't a need, leave these out. Home address. A lot of us include home address. It's not wrong. It just puts you in a situation where you don't know where your CV goes out to, and you are sharing with the world where you live exactly, unit number and all. Okay, now in some cases you might want to include address because you think you live on the same street as the company that you you're applying the job at, and that might be a good thing. Yeah, if you may, and you might want to leave out certain parts of your address, like your unit number, level, and whatnot, while you keep the street name there, or even just the town name. If you are in the US and you're looking at returning to Malaysia, um, and the job that you apply at is in KL or even Shah Alam, you may state both your addresses. Right now, you are in Santa Monica Boulevard, California, moving back to, I mean, maybe the address in Shah Alam is applied only with effect on September 2019, for instance. Okay, so they know that you're coming back. There is hope for them to get in touch with you and for you to work with them. Otherwise, they might think, oh, you're far away, and so on. So all these things are subjective, really. Although not a bad thing to have or not have. It's just a matter of keeping certain privacy private, really. Okay, hobbies can go into may include, which was addressed earlier, or not at all. Okay, salary, current and expected salary. I know in certain countries and certain cultures, it is not appropriate to share salary or being asked on your salary. In fact, it can be even a legal case. So you need to know. I'm just guessing, if assuming in the US, if you're not allowed to ask a candidate how much you are paid, but when you return to Malaysia, for instance, it is allowed, then you need to adjust it accordingly. Okay, that means you need to know that in different culture it is accepted differently. In general, there is no need to put your current expected salary there. Otherwise, you might run into the risk of shortchanging yourself. What if you put that your expected salary is 2,500 US dollars, but the company is willing to pay 3,500, right? So as far as they're not asking you that, there is no need for you to supply them with that. But there are certain job advertisements that I have seen in Singapore, for instance, that actually state to include your salary details, current and expected, in your job application. So have a look at that. Okay, so right at the bottom you see everything is all with exception, right? References, it's not a bad thing to have them, but see, here is where it is also not advisable to have them, because you might think that you're actually widening the chance of getting called by the employer because you have a fantastic referee or something. He's the dean of so and so, whichever university, and you might know a certain politician or things like that. But you have to also bear in mind that you're giving a bit of personal information, such as the person's phone number or email address and whatnot, that he or she may not be aware of. So whether or not they're agreeable to it, and if they're agreeable to it, you may put the references there. But again, like I said, it is not necessary. Okay. Finally, fancy fonts and graphics and colors. Now, let's bring us back to the 100 pieces of CVs that this recruiter gets. Okay, and just like marking many exam papers, right? And unless the recruiter or whoever who receives all the CVs is wearing a pair of sunglasses, you don't want to blind him or her out from all the fancy fonts and bright colors that you put on your CV. It's not the colors that attracts the employer. It is the content, okay? Because they want to hear of you, what you can bring to the table, okay? Bring yourself back to the date situation again. It's what that person is like, rather than necessarily what she or he is wearing. Okay, so you want to impress the employer in the right way. Okay, so next slide. As we move further on to creating the CV, bear in mind the format and style. Okay, we can play around with different formats to see which looks most professional and one that suits you. Okay, again, different culture, different country, different companies may have different expectations. Okay, but what out of all this, I would say that bear in mind the length is probably more important than necessarily whether your format or the style of your CV has boxes or not. Okay, given that I believe I'm speaking to most of you who are undergraduates or even potential prospective fresh graduates in the short future, you are likely to fall under the category of someone who has internship experience or fresh graduate experience. That means, as what I shared earlier on, the someone with 2 work experiences, one in internship and one in maybe 2 years of work somewhere. So um, considering the above that I mentioned, you know, different country, culture, and company may accept the style of the CV differently. As long as you are someone who is an undergraduate looking for an internship or fresh graduate looking for their first job to begin their career in, keep your CV to 1 page. Okay, and as you get more experience, someone with 10 years or 15 years of experience may have more to say about themselves, right? They've worked in several companies, they've held several positions, they've had many job responsibilities. Now, this also comes down to the point stated above, which is the different culture and country. In Asia, many parts of Asia, where 2 pages for someone who has had several years of experience and what more 10 or 15 years of experience is usually something acceptable. Okay, but if you're looking at France, no matter how many years you've had experience in something, 10, 20 years of experience, they still expect you to have 1 page long of CV. So it's no different to an intern or a fresh graduate. Okay, so the above applies again. Where are you sending this to? Which country? What are their culture and style like? Okay, right. So moving on to the next slide. Finally, we've moved away from creating the CV, as you can see at the top, to customizing your CV before sending it off. Okay. Now, what you can see here is an image of a cookie cutter. A cookie cutter is a tool that you use to cut doughs in order to make cookies before you bake them, right? So what a cookie cutter does is that it cuts the dough all in the same shape, form, and size. You cannot have your CV in the same way. It's just not going to cut it. Why? Because different companies are from different industries, they have different cultures, and so on. They have different settings altogether. So if you are based in Germany and you speak fluent German and you're very familiar with German culture, it's great for you. And if you have your CV all stated everywhere and that whole of 1 page saying that you're very accustomed to German culture, this and that, and you send that same CV stating how familiar you are, how you excel in delivering maybe projects in German and so on, and then you send that same CV to a Japanese company. Now, let me ask you, do you think that is going to fly with them, right? So that's where you need to tweak your CV. You don't have to highlight too much of how German your CV is when you're sending one to a Japanese company, for instance. This is just an example. And many other things that you might need to go over in order for you to customize based on the different settings. Okay. All right. So moving on to the next slide, still within customizing your CV. I think we just need to move to the next slide. I'm not sure if everybody's getting the next slide. Okay, great. And then next slide, customizing. Now, consider the job that you are applying for, which is I have briefly shared with you earlier. Okay, One of it is the job description. Consider the job description. So if you're an accountant, many big companies would like to see that you have have experience working in a big four company, for the benefit of everybody else who is not an accountant or an auditor. The big four companies are the auditing firms like KPMG, Deloitte, PwC, and Ernst and Young. Okay, so if you are going into an auditing company, or maybe working within the audit line, it is quite common to see that the company requires you to have had a big four experience. So you would have to tailor your CV in such a way that you have stated that you have this experience in a big four. But that is if you want to look for a job as an accountant or an auditor. What if, even after your Bachelor of Accountancy degree, you want to work in human resource? Okay, does that still apply? Usually no. As a HR executive or HR manager, it's not important that you have had experience in a big four company. Okay, so that's where you don't necessarily have to highlight that experience in that CV. Again, this is where you need to customize your CV, highlight what is relevant to the company, to what they require, to what the job wants. Okay, so stated the job description, job requirements, and then also job requirements, as I mentioned, speaking German or something that you're familiar with within the German market would be great if you're working in a company that leverages on that. But if it is a completely different culture, then it's not going to be great for them, okay, or you. So it doesn't matter. So you need to tweak it accordingly. And also the next point here is the job nature. If you're an events manager, you're expected to run around, need to know people and things like that. It's great that you have that skill in networking. You might say that every weekend you are involved in internations.org, where you network a lot with people of different ethnicities and nationalities. But if you are applying for a job as an accountant and that role doesn't require any networking, in fact, you're expected to sit behind the desk, then you need to highlight what's important, which is maybe an experience of a job that is sitting behind a desk more than the networking term that you would otherwise use in your CV. Okay, so look at the kind of job that you need. Don't use your CV like you use a cookie cutter to cut the dough. Okay, so just very quickly, a good CV is tailored to the specific job and company you are applying for. There are some things to consider in customizing your CV, so do consider these things that were mentioned. Next slide. Finally, at the end of customizing a CV, make sure that you go over your CV, check for whether or not there are other things that the company is doing that you could add value to, right? So research on the company. What does the company do? What is their mission statement? There are some companies that that state their values are, in diversity and so on. So if you have had a share in that, you're a Malaysian student, someone who comes from Malaysia, studying in the US, and then every week you actually volunteer in a refugee community, and internations.org, where you meet a lot of expatriates. All this would actually be relevant to, or could be in line with the values of the company, which, as stated, they grow on diversity, things like that. Okay, so go over your CV as soon as you've customized it to see what else that the company is or has in order to meet that the culture very nicely there. Okay, and what are they looking for in an employee? They're looking for German speaker, what have you. Just go over that, and as well as what skills required, which we have covered earlier. Okay, so next slide. Finally, go over your CV as well to check if there are any spelling and grammatical mistakes. Okay, proofread for any sentences that could be written more concisely. CVs that are concise and well written tend to do better than long-winded ones that have repetitive information. So make sure you don't repeat yourself. It's better to list many of your traits than the same few traits over and over again. Okay, you don't want to sound boring. Read your CV as if you were the company that you're applying for. Okay, right, and the following slide is I think okay, go over your CV, which is get someone else to read your CV, because this way you have a pair of fresh eyes, because otherwise you're so consumed by what you think should be in the CV. But having a pair of fresh eyes would allow you to see certain mistakes or gaps that you could fill otherwise, in order for your CV to always be better than what you think. Okay, so basically look to see if there are any other materials that you would like to send in along with your CV. Companies may ask for a cover letter, additional documents such as transcripts, salary details, samples of your work, such as maybe articles or write-ups and what have you. Okay, so go over that. Just check over again what the company requires so that you don't miss out on anything else. And this could be within your CV or documents that accompany your CV. All right. So as we get on to the next slide. Finally, if you can see at the top there, we've moved from creating the CV to customizing, going over your CV before eventually sending it across to the employer. With that, just like in a relationship between a man and a woman, and you're hoping at the end of it, and you have a proposition, and hoping that with all that you have presented to that person, you get picked, and you hope for the best. And if that job is indeed for you, is the best for you, it suits you, then you would progress to the next step of the interview, being called up for the interview. Otherwise, plenty of fish in the sea. You move on to the next one and repeat the process of your job search. Okay, so I think that's it as far as we're concerned right now. I believe we can get to the questions.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for the sharing session just now. And I would like to go through some questions from the floor, from the attendees. And number one is, what is the difference between CV and resume?
Okay. Yeah, this is if you Google it, actually, I think I don't have the definition on me. I understand the differences. Actually, it's a matter of terminology. Let me just try and see if I can find something for you here on Google. But really, this is a matter of Google. It works the same way. I believe in certain Anglo-Saxon countries, they call it CV, and other countries call it resume, right? But it's a matter of definition. Okay. It's not something of too much. It shouldn't worry you in a way that is he asking you for a CV or resume? No, it is technically it works the same way. Okay, and while I Google for the exact definition, maybe we can go to the next question, and we can come back to it later.
Yeah, sure. As you have mentioned just now, that 80% of the CV will go to the trash, and based on your experience, how long does it take for a recruiter to go through one CV or what resume from the
Right.
applicants?
I would say it's quite a good question here because you know, I did mention, that's true. I did mention that, you know, in a quick time that you need to be picked up there by whoever is looking at it, in this case, the recruiter. So if you actually look up at the statistics, again, I don't have the number, but it's only a couple of seconds to run through to find keywords. Now, recruiter, whoever is at the behind receiving the CV is not going to read word for word. Okay, he or she is going to pick out the important things like, for instance, an accountant. If we're looking for someone who has had 2 years of experience in a big four company, graduated in an American university, they would prefer maybe American university to, I'm just giving an example, to a British one, okay, for example. So these are key points here for the recruiter to look out for. Once they see education, which is uh, American university, that, you know, okay, that's one tick. Okay, what did they study there? Of course, accountancy. Okay, that's another tick. And then they worked in the Big Four at least 2 years, Deloitte perhaps, and okay, that's another one. They're not going to read the life story of this person in a storytelling way. Okay, so it also depends on the recruiter to pick out very quickly on that. But to answer your question, it's really to pick up for the keywords before putting them into the 20%. And then after receiving all the compiling the 20%, that's where they go into further details of what else is required. But first phase is always to pick out the important keywords there, okay, based on the job description, not word for word. Okay, hope that helps.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you so much. And next question will be, other than the list that you have listed in the presentation before, like uh, what is um, what is the thing that you don't put in the CV?
Mm-hmm.
So, really, what is your number one no in your CV? If you look at the CV, what is your number one? You say that no, this is will not be in this from your personal review.
Well, this also depends on the recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, when you look at a CV, at that piece of document, you don't look at it word for word, right? You look at it in a macro perspective. Okay, it could be anything that could throw the recruiter off, right? It could be just that one word that throws that recruiter off, really. Again, this might not be something that would be of great concern here, but as it's more importantly is what goes into the CV, right? And if you have most of it there, it shouldn't throw the recruiter off their chair, okay? But if it were me, then something that would probably throw me off if I were to receive something is just that I'm not able to read anything on the CV. Maybe, like I said, maybe it's just too fancy fonts and everything's blurring me out, or maybe I have to put on my sunglasses first or something like that, and that just throws me off the chair, right? And not proceed with further assessment of the CV and things. So there is no one particular element there, but I think more importantly is how the CV should be attractive. And I think based on what was shared, or even from what most of us know to have in a CV, would really allow you to succeed than not succeed. And in this case, where this question is concerned, it's looking at something of a minute scale, which is, I think it's more important to focus on what should go into the CV, what could work for the CV, right? It's not very often that you're gonna look at every CV and say, oh, this is not great, this is not good, no, it's not like that. We just look at keywords. As long as your CV is not gonna blind you from, not being able to read it for whatever reason. Maybe it's in funny forms like you've got in ancient forms or something like that. You're not even going to start reading a CV that way, right? Yeah. So I think focus on what could work on your CV, and I hope that with what was shared, it would give you the gist of majority of how your CV can be attractive enough to be called upon for the first interview. Okay. So before I get to the next question, I just want to address the earlier question about what's the difference between CV and resume, right?
Yeah. Sure.
As I mentioned, not worry about how different it works, because it works the same way. This is a matter of terminology. All you need to do is Google. We've got Google these days. So you can actually find the definition here. What is a curriculum vitae? It is a Latin word, of course. So and it explains, right, what that means in Latin. So what is the difference between a resume and CV? The primary differences between a resume and a CV are the length, what is included, and what each is used for. While both are used in job applications, a resume and a CV are not always interchangeable. Okay, now these days everybody use the word interchangeably. So again, it works the same way. You don't have to be frightened by whether they're asking for a CV and you're giving them a resume. Okay, everybody these days, they don't even really place importance on what somebody is looking out for, CV or resume. It's a matter of terminology rather than the technical function of it. Okay, because it works the same way, right?
All right. Noted. All right. Before we end our session, I have one last question from myself. Because I have Googled like many sample CV on internet before, and I saw that some of them have put a reference on their CV, and some of them are not. And would you what is your comment about the reference in the CV?
Having the references on the CV, I think I've addressed this earlier. I did mention there is no wrong or right in this case, although to be honest, I have worked with enough recruiters to say that, oh, you're making our life really a lot easier if you put the references, which is a disadvantage to the candidate. Why? Let me tell you why. Because sometimes as a recruiter, we're looking for more than one candidate or one job. And by receiving a CV that has referees on them, that could very well be our next candidate for something else we have in mind. And you might just come second. Okay? So situations like that, it's not like that all the time, but it can come out as that. Now, references, just like salary details, can, when they will get there when they cross the bridge, really. So when you're about to seal the deal, okay, you get the job and say, we like you, let's sign the contract. Before that, can we have some of your details? Okay, so then you'll provide your details. Sometimes it might require salary details, documentation, previous employers, as well as referees. That's where you put in your referees normally. Okay, and in a lot of American companies, you don't even have to provide certain transcripts that you went to this university or not, because they have a third party. You just have to state on your CV or your job application you studied here and everywhere, and a third party would call on their behalf to check that you have gone here and which year and so on. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is, whether or not they have an intermediary, whether or not they ask, you put them on CV, when the time comes, they will ask for it. There's no need to put referee on your CV. But like I said in my presentation earlier, it is not wrong even if you want to have them. It does not allow you necessarily to score more points by having by maybe knowing a politician and stating his name on there. But you also must bear in mind there is perhaps a protocol around giving referees, because you want to make sure that if you know someone as a referee, that you that they have agreed for you to share their personal contact details on your CV for somebody else to call them up. Okay, and there's, like I said, protocol around that, because when the time comes for you to sign the contract, the employer will walk through certain documentation with you, and they will usually ask your permission to say, we would like to call 2 or 3 of your referees. Would that be okay? Because it's only polite, okay, and not just catch somebody off guard and call this person up, no matter how of a big person he is in society, for instance, that referee of yours. Okay, although I must say it has happened before that employers still call unannounced, where they call up a referee without any of the parties, yourself as a candidate or the referee, being aware that they're going to be called on. Okay, so to lessen the chance of any surprises, it is recommended not to put referees, and you can even Google to find this out. There are going to be places that say you can put referees, and there are going to be places that say why you shouldn't put referees. It is not a wrong or right thing. It is just to guard everyone's interest, really. Is that okay? Is that
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, that really answers my question. I think okay, great. I think I got to everyone's question from the floor, and I think I'm gonna wrap this session. Um, yeah, that was the last question from for the webinar today.
Right.
And,
Thank you.
yeah.
And so yeah, so with that, I think in my next slide, right, I would like to thank Seats Job Fair for having me again. I've shared my contact details below. I'm on Instagram, where I actually share videos as well as postings on career tips, facilitate and aid in your job search, or even if you have questions like you had just then, and you have further questions as you embark in your career, you can contact me, and my LinkedIn profile there as well. You can connect with me. A bit more of my profile is stated there. Just take note of the address there, CH at the front, I am dynamic at the back. So yeah, so thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for sharing very beneficial information and helpful guidance to us on how to prepare a great CV in the future, and as building the uh, outstanding resume and CV to companies and to the job recruiters. I hope this webinar will give you a lot of takeaway to take home, and that you can use it in the future in writing and building your resume or CV. I think that's all for today's webinar. Thank you so much for attending this today's webinar.
Thank you, everyone.
So